While many countries around the world embrace multiculturalism and religious diversity, there are still places where Muslims may feel less welcome due to a combination of political policies, social attitudes, and cultural factors. Some nations are often perceived as unwelcoming to Muslims, each for unique reasons rooted in their historical experiences, cultural norms, or governmental stances. In these countries, Muslims represent a tiny fraction of the population. Number 1. China. China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region has been heavily criticized. Reports indicate that over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have been detained in so-called re-education camps. The Chinese government claims these camps are for combating extremism, but many international organizations, including the UN, see them as part of a systematic effort to suppress Uyghur culture and religion. Practices such as forced labor, mandatory political indoctrination, restrictions on religious practices like fasting during Ramadan, destruction of mosques, and mass surveillance of Muslims have created an environment that is deeply hostile toward Muslims. The Chinese Communist Party promotes a vision of Chinese identity that is closely tied to Han Chinese cultural norms. Any deviation from this, especially religious practices perceived as foreign or separatist, is viewed with suspicion. The state's atheistic stance and the perception of Islam as a potential source of extremism contribute to this hostility. Number 2. India. Under the current government led by the Bharatiya Janata Party BJP, there has been a noticeable shift toward Hindu nationalism. This ideology, often called Hindutva, emphasizes India as a fundamentally Hindu nation, and this has led to policies and rhetoric that marginalize Muslims. For example, the Citizenship Amendment Act provides a pathway to citizenship for non-Muslim refugees from neighboring countries, which has been seen as discriminatory against Muslims. India has seen a rise in mob violence, lynchings, and hate crimes against Muslims, often linked to cow protection vigilantism or accusations of love jihad, a conspiracy theory that Muslim men are trying to convert Hindu women through marriage. While these incidents are carried out by extremist groups, the government's response has often been criticized as inadequate, leading to perceptions of complicity or tacit approval. Number 3. Myanmar Burma. Myanmar's treatment of the Rohingya Muslim minority is a stark example of ethnic and religious persecution. The Rohingya have faced systemic discrimination for decades, but the situation escalated dramatically in 2017 when the military launched a violent crackdown, killing thousands and forcing hundreds of thousands to flee to Bangladesh. The UN and other international organizations have accused Myanmar of genocide. The Burmese government refuses to recognize the Rohingya as citizens, often referring to them as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. Buddhism is closely linked to national identity in Myanmar, and extremist Buddhist nationalist groups have portrayed Islam as a threat to Myanmar's cultural and religious purity. Anti-Muslim sentiment has been fueled by monks like Ashin Warathu, who have openly incited hatred against Muslims. Number 4. Japan. Japan has a very small Muslim population, estimated at around 200,000 in a country of over 125 million. Due to this small presence, there is limited understanding or awareness of Islam among the general Japanese public. This lack of familiarity often leads to stereotypes and misconceptions about Muslims, which can manifest in social attitudes and policies that seem unwelcoming. Following global terrorism incidents, Japanese authorities have increased surveillance of certain communities, including Muslims. There have been reports of Japanese Muslims and foreign Muslims being monitored by police, particularly in the lead-up to major international events, such as the Tokyo Olympics. These measures, while framed as security precautions, can be perceived as discriminatory by the Muslim community. Number 5. Sri Lanka. After the 2019 Easter Sunday bombings by Islamist extremists, anti-Muslim sentiment surged in Sri Lanka. There were reports of mobs attacking Muslim-owned businesses and mosques. The government's response included policies like banning burqas and closing certain Islamic schools' madrasas. While these policies were justified on security grounds, they were criticized for targeting the broader Muslim community. Tensions between the Sinhalese Buddhist majority and the Muslim minority have historical roots. Many Sinhalese Buddhists see the growth of the Muslim population as a threat, and extremist groups have spread propaganda against Muslims, accusing them of plotting to overtake the country demographically and economically. Number 6. Israel. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is central to why Israel is often seen as unwelcoming to Muslims, particularly Arabs and Palestinians. The ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories, restrictions on movement for Palestinians, settlement expansions, and periodic military operations in Gaza contribute to a perception of hostility. Many Muslim-majority countries and Muslim individuals criticize Israel's policies as discriminatory and oppressive toward Muslims. Israel's stringent security policies, including profiling and the use of checkpoints, can make it challenging for Muslim visitors, especially those of Palestinian or Arab descent. These measures, while justified by Israel as necessary for national security, are often viewed as discriminatory. Number 7. Poland and Hungary. Both Poland and Hungary have resisted accepting Muslim refugees and migrants, particularly during the 2015 to 2016 European migrant crisis. Leaders in both countries have argued that Muslim immigration threatens their Christian cultural heritage and national identity. They have implemented policies like border barriers and strict asylum procedures to limit the entry of Muslims. The political rhetoric in both Poland and Hungary often emphasizes a fear of Islamization and portrays Muslim refugees as a security threat. This has been reflected in public opinion, with a significant portion of the population expressing negative attitudes toward Muslims. Number 8. Denmark. Denmark has implemented several laws that affect Muslim communities, such as the ban on face coverings affecting niqabs and burqas in public and rules targeting ghetto areas where many Muslims live. These laws, often justified as promoting integration, have been criticized for disproportionately affecting Muslims. Denmark's social climate has seen a rise in nationalist and anti-immigrant sentiments. Some Danish politicians have made controversial statements about Muslims and immigrants, which have contributed to a perception of hostility toward Muslims. Number 9. South Korea. Homogeneity and limited exposure to Islam. South Korea, like Japan, is a relatively homogeneous society with limited exposure to Muslims and Islamic culture. Muslims make up less than 0.5% of the South Korean population. This limited presence means that many South Koreans may have little to no direct experience with Muslims, leading to misunderstandings and stereotypes. South Korean society places a strong emphasis on cultural homogeneity and social cohesion. There is a general weariness of foreign cultures that do not easily integrate into Korean social norms. Islam, with its distinct religious practices, dietary laws like halal, and dress codes such as the hijab, may be seen as different and difficult to accommodate within the existing social framework. South Korea is predominantly Christian and Buddhist, with a notable evangelical Christian population that views proselytization as part of its mission. There have been instances of anti-Muslim sentiment among some Christian groups, particularly in response to fears of Islamic proselytization or perceived threats to South Korea's religious identity. Number 10. Greece. Greece has been on the front line of the European refugee crisis, with many Muslim refugees arriving on its shores. Overwhelmed resources, economic difficulties, and societal tensions have led to hostile attitudes toward these refugees. Reports of poor treatment, overcrowded camps, and violent pushbacks of refugees, many of whom are Muslim, have contributed to a perception that Greece is not welcoming. Far-right groups in Greece have been vocal in their opposition to Muslim immigration, sometimes engaging in violent actions against immigrants. The presence of these groups and their influence on public discourse has created a climate that can feel unwelcoming to Muslims.